We're going to move right along with our next panel discussion, more on the cloud. The tagline in this particular instance, collaboration, innovation and speed. And this is a panel which is going to be moderated by me, I'm afraid. I'll apologise for that in advance. Please can I call on to stage my panellists, Maria Campbell, Chief Operating Officer of Griffin Bank. Karen May Ching, Global Financial Services ISV Sales Lead for AWS. And last only because his name starts with a V, Federico Venturieri, who is Vice President, Partnerships and Go-to-Market for 10X. So, we are talking about the cloud. How is cloud transforming banking? Is cloud transforming banking, or is it just another thing? Let's start with the banker on the platform. Maria, what does the cloud mean for Griffin?
The cloud essentially means that we don't need to have a bunch of people running around a data center plugging things in and out. The cloud means that it's interesting, right? So at Griffin, we're a banking as a service provider, and what we are doing is taking care of the things that are very boring and don't add any value to your customers. So if you're starting your own small fintech, you're like, yeah, okay, we need to not launder money, financial crime's bad, we should probably have a ledger, we might need to do some reg reporting, money needs to sit somewhere and someone to pay us interest. But fundamentally, those aren't the exciting things about building a business. And in the same way, at Griffin, you need to run things somewhere. Why does it need to be your computer? It can just be somebody else's computer. We can just let AWS take care of everything for us. So it enables us as a business to focus.
Well, if AWS is taking care of business, as it were, what are the other benefits that is driving adoption? Why are customers coming to you?
Mike, can you hear me? Thank you for that, Marie. For AWS, we see it like words of agility, right? The velocity of innovation, because the speed of iteration is quite important here. And when I say speed, is a lot of people ask us what real-time really means, right? The way we describe it in the cloud is real-time is when you need it, actually need it, when you need to analyze the data, and you have access to that data at the right time, the right moment you need it. So we put the customer at the center of everything to innovate. So that's the power of the cloud that is given in some of our banking customers. We share the value of looking backwards to your customer and understanding what are the needs, right? Words like hyper-personalization is coming in, where each and everyone in this room would have different kinds of needs from their bank. How are we having a full view of that customer is quite important. So that's giving you speed, time to market, time to value, and optimize. The second one I would say about what are the benefits that we're seeing so far with our customer is efficiency. So efficiency is not just reducing cost. In the first panel, there's a lot, and even Tony have talked about how are you enabling your organization to change, right? There needs to be a constant enablement and skill building for people to understand that cloud is not taking over their jobs. No, we are enabling.
No, AI is going to do that.
What it does is it needs to be seen as tools to enable you to solve your problems on a daily basis. So it's a typical lean management principle where the iteration and problem solving happens at the time, the moment that particular issue happens. And what's nice about the cloud is what Maria have said earlier is you can do it either where you are, probably that's real time. And second is it helps our customers to be proactive rather than reactive of the different risks that they encounter on a daily basis. Because when you're a bank, right, if you have, let's say, $1 billion in deposits, you can just imagine how many transactions you are processing on a daily basis. So part of the benefit of the cloud is security. This is a catch-22 most of the time in discussions because they say it's public, it's a regulated industry. So what we always say is, in AWS, security is job zero. We just had our reinforced, we have a separate conference specifically dedicated to how can we secure your data in the cloud. And of the 200 services we have, let's say 117 right now are fully data encrypted. So this unstuck and unblock and demystify that perception. So, again, understanding how that security is also important, and we have the importance of shared responsibility. What are you responsible for as a customer? And what is AWS responsible for protecting you as our customer? So that's how we see our customers are looking at right now. And there's a big culture about the power of data and how data is becoming an asset rather than just a risk mitigation tool. So that's some of the benefits that we're seeing, Robin.
Okay, let me turn this on its head and come to you, Federico. We're talking about the cloud, but obviously we're also talking about core banking. So as far as it goes, what are the key benefits of cloud for core banking?
Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Karen. And thank you, Marie, as well. Nice to meet you, everyone. I'm Fred. I'm at 10x and I look after partnerships. I guess just a bit of a history of 10x before I get started on answering the question. 10x was built about 7 years ago and was founded by Anthony Jenkins, who was the group CEO of Barclays. And it was born in the cloud, so we're very much one of the neo vendors out there, as we like to be called. And cloud for us has been there right from the start. We've built on top of the cloud, so we're all about offering and translating those cloud benefits that Karen highlighted around agility, etc., which I'll expand on, to our customers. And our focus has always been on building a platform that, in Anthony's word, makes banking 10 times better for the bank, for their customers, and for society. And whatever we build needs to be good enough for banks like Barclays, right? So some people think of cloud, they think, okay, great, the fintechs can do it, but for big banks, it is very much also at the core of what they need to be working on. So benefits really that we see ourselves when we speak to customers, and also the way we built our product, is total cost of ownership is a clear one, right? It's well documented. Your total cost of ownership, if you include also, very importantly, the number of people that you need to maintain, your infrastructure and so on, having something that gets as close as possible to, for example, a managed service can allow you to dramatically reduce cost. The second one is agility. So I'm personally a customer of Chase UK. Chase UK runs on the 10x platform. It's one of our flagship customers, and I'm very, very happy every time I get a notification saying my interest rate on my savings account has just been bumped up. And that happens with a few clicks. I am not joking. It takes literally minutes for Chase to do that across all of their accounts. So if now if you think of not having that functionality, which I'm guessing some of you in the room are thinking, wow, like I wish we had that, because if you have to actually time your interest rate rises in an environment like today, you're looking at trying to basically time the interest rate rise cycle of the Bank of England. If you have a 3-month lead time, are we going to raise too much? Are we going to raise too little? If it takes 3 months for you to actually raise your interest rates, you might be in trouble once you do. So there is a real tangible benefit there to the customer, a real risk to the bank that can be removed with this sort of agility. And agility, scalability maybe will be a third one. If you're launching in a new country, do you need to build a data center in that country and then hire a whole bunch of people to just manage that and manage that growth? In the startup world, we talk about failing fast, and that is only possible on the cloud, really. I'd say two kind of secondary points is, if you are running on the cloud, if you are using the latest technology, you will be able to attract the best people. We all know that banks struggle to attract talent, in technology especially, and the best engineers want to work on the best tech, on the most innovative and interesting problems. They don't want to work on something that is considered antiquated, that is a commodity, and if you take your engineers' time away from running something that is really the plumbing of the bank, but instead get them to focus on things that are really exciting and are really value add for your customers, you will be able to get the best talent on board. The final one is security, and I think we'll talk about that a bit later, but I'm wondering, I tried to ask AWS how much they spend on security and then compare that with any single bank's spend on security. I think you would see that it's orders of magnitude bigger without knowing the number. I think we'll touch on that a bit later in the conversation, but there's a number of benefits there. I think those are all well documented, and there are different flavors of core banking in the cloud, which I'd encourage you to explore further, including 10x.
I think I think there's something interesting here, right? Because your company is relatively young. Actually, all of the companies that I've worked for are younger than my child, who's still in primary school, not for very long. And like at no point has there ever been a discussion about should we have a data center or not. That's just not something that you do when you're trying to start a new business, right? And so I think there's kind of an analog here as well, in that if you're starting a new business, at no point are you like, okay, we should do all of our customer service by post. We should have people post and fax us things, right? Because you don't do that now, right? Like the idea of being like, oh yeah, okay, but you need to write us a letter or send us a fax to, ask me a question about like my Spotify account, right? And so I think like the fact that everyone is just doing this is just default for everything that's being built now, just shows that everybody needs to catch up, right?
And I think with that, right, one key benefit that we're seeing right now is sustainability. How technology is reducing carbon footprint. So in AWS right now, all of our services have that carbon footprint indicator, especially on data centers, right? When you try migrating that data center, you take a look at your core. And we don't want, we don't boil the ocean. How do you move your data centers in the cloud is like when you are being asked how do you eat an elephant is one bite at a time, right? So with that in mind, that sustainability benefit, like for example, Capital One, when they went all in the cloud with AWS, it's a 5-year journey. And when we asked them to write a business case, they didn't write about agility, they didn't write about scalability. So we were shocked, it's like, you're not reaping the benefits. And they say, no, we're gonna write about how many light bulbs we saved, how million tons of electricity and carbon footprint that saving. So that business case is really live up to now, and we're leveraging on that because Capital One made us realize that although technology can be a contributor to increase carbon footprint, it's a big enabler to reduce it. So that's also one of the benefits that we're passing on to our customers.
One of the things I think I'd like to say, it is possibly a little bit of a rabbit hole, so I'm not going to pursue it, but one of the things I'd like to say at this point is that banks, architecturally speaking, are Grecian temples, they're Roman temples. Everybody agree with me on that? Columns, porticos, they look solid, they look trustworthy, they look as though they've been around for hundreds of years. These days, the bank is on my phone. The bank's image is what I see on my phone, or possibly even my Apple Watch, or similar pieces of technology. How we access banks has changed, is changing, and will change more because of use of cloud. How are you, Karen, just to stick with you for a moment, how are you enabling your customers to engage more in their journey onto the cloud?
So a couple of things, right? Because every time our customers comes to us and say, look, Karen, it's normally either the CIO or the CTO you first talk to with. They come to us and say, Karen, we want to transform in the cloud. And I always throw back the same, being a trained consultant that way, you throw back the same question that are thrown back to you. And I say, what do you mean by transformation, right? So first is understanding what are the problems we're trying to solve, because that takes an amount of time for customers to really identify what they really like to do in the cloud. right? Because there's so many buzzwords right now, even ChatGPT, we've talked about it earlier, generative AI. I mean, there's a lot happening right now. So second thing is who? Who will own? Because a lot of people would like to own change, but a lot of people don't want to execute it. So a lot of people likes to talk about, oh, strategy, we'll go in the room, we do the whiteboard. And when it comes to ownership, that's when you see the heads are going down. You know, well, maybe we can change, right? So 75% of digital transformations fail because of the lack of senior sponsorship and leadership for change. So that's quite important. That's why I think we work with partners that are also thought leaders, right? To influence these leaders to understand what it takes. Because for me is, the third one we're enabling is, what are the potential risks you will encounter if it's a 3-year, a 5-year transformation you're looking at, right? And how do you break those pieces of projects in chunks? So again, being a program manager at that, you want to make sure that they understand what you mean by sprints, what that means. Because sprint doesn't mean 10 days. It could be 3 years, right? Or the least you could do is, okay, if you do a sprint in 16 months, please raise your hand, I will hug you right now. And you know, so for technology, because some of the banks would come to us, or some of the leaders would come to us and say, oh, we want to move this A to AWS, and then we ask, and then what? Moving is one thing. Making it work for you is another thing. Because there's a person outside your institution that's benefiting for the services that we're already building in the cloud, right? The third one I would say is, how do you measure milestones? Do you measure milestones by failure? Do you measure milestones by, oh, we've achieved 20% cost efficiency, that I've let go of 50 people who knows COBOL and no one knows it right now, right? So those are the things we ask. So these are honest conversations, and leaders don't like it when, you know, you're honest, but at least you put transparency in the table. So again, we build sort of a decision tree on milestones. The way we measure milestones is the key to iteration. How fast we can iterate, and what is your propensity to fail, right? Propensity to fail is understanding that not everything will work the first time you do it. That's technology, right? I mean, if you take a look at the history of the brands right now, even Amazon, with Jeff starting it as a bookstore, where it closed a lot of bookstores in the US, by the way. And where it is right now is something else. But it took him like 10, 20 years to move this company to where it is right now. So it's the same with but with the banks, what we're telling is they were there before I was born, right? We're talking to banks, they were there before, even older than your child right now. But at the end of the day, this is also preparing them from that mindset. And last but not the least is how now you're gonna innovate for your customer at the end of the day. So a good example, I am also a member of, a customer of Chase, because we know it's on AWS and it's with 10X. After 30 years of banking with Citi, I was employed by both banks, by the way. Why I'm doing that is because I'm also educating myself. Because I'm a traditional banker, you know, I was trained to run a branch, and now you basically don't run a branch, right?
What's one of those?
Yeah, exactly. So now I need to train myself to use my phone to do transactions, or to use my Apple Watch, which I'm not used to. I used to have this big wallet that has full of cards, and you pull one stack at a time. And now you have cards for security that are now, you know, doesn't even have a number in front of it, right? For security purposes. Before, in the early, this will show my age, pardon me. Before, in the late 80s, 90s, everybody wants to like emboss names and everything in that gold card, right? But now it does not matter. Why? Because customers also are being educated by how we use technology and how technology empowers them. And how you manage that information is key. And we talked about data, so how do we now enable that data to be your powerhouse, to be your asset, to really serve the customer? So again, just in summary, identify the what before you go into the how. Second is who. Who are the people that are leading it, and who in the organizations we need to train and enable. Third is measurement. How are we measuring this transformation? So, you don't want to talk to your cloud provider every quarter when you're doing, it's no, right? You need to put some cadences there to understand how are you measuring yourselves. The fourth one is the how, breaking those projects into small chunks. Because if you're a 10,000, 75,000 organization, can you imagine when you go in front, you have a town hall and say, guys, we're gonna change the bank and it starts tomorrow. See, silence, right? So that's quite important. Last but not the least is the customer that you're also serving outside, right? So customers are two things for me. It's the employees, who's empowering and being enabled by the technology. How are we enabling them and preparing them for what's gonna happen? The third one is how the technology would also teach our customers of what we're trying to do. So those are some of the key steps and enablers.
Let's look at it from the point of view of the banking industry. So, Maria, to you, what are the challenges? I noticed a certain amount of nodding going on, and also, on at least one occasion, hysterical laughter.
It wasn't hysterical.
So what are the challenges facing the banking industry itself when adopting cloud technology? And how do you overcome them? Presumably you overcome them by tapping somebody on the shoulder when their head's down like this and they're not meeting your eye, so that they can be given responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, both of the, as the banking industry, I've worked in 2 banks, both of which have just started in the cloud. They've both started in the last 10 years or so. It's just like, let's just make a new bank and we'll just build it in the cloud. So there's like big, taking a sort of behemoth with decades, centuries of culture behind it that is not excited about changing things, that also involves taking something that's kind of rickety and has sort of been built up over several decades and like moving it to something new, isn't really something that I've been involved in. We just kind of start it from scratch, and then at some point I move on and leave people to deal with the mess. But I think from a kind of regulatory perspective, there's a lot of conversation happening in the industry at the moment about operational resilience, and there's a lot happening around sort of critical third parties, and so the PRA and the FCA are both really, really interested in how we're ensuring that we're resilient. And like, it's very hard to be resilient if you have one data center and you're like, oh, okay, we just need someone to accidentally cut a power cable and then you're totally out of it. But at the same time, it's like, actually, how far along this resilience do we need to be? Do we need to be across like every data center, every region, every availability zone with every cloud provider, so that we can prove that there is no risk of us going down? So I think the interesting thing from the banking perspective is like, actually, how when you move to the cloud, use the cloud, like how do you make sure that the other people's computers that you're using are distributed enough that you have the right level of operational resilience that's proportionate to your business, your customers, your needs, and what you have to invest.
Resilience is the word you've been using, but a lot of that is to do with security, I guess. So, Frederic, who owns security and how much of a concern is that?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, and I think the two are very closely interlinked. I think the answer to that is very much how much does the bank want or need to own, right? Should the bank have a choice? Yes, of course. I would say, from a 10x perspective, obviously we run on AWS, we run in the cloud, And if you think of some of the inherent benefits of the cloud when it comes to security is, if there's a security breach, you can launch a patch that will cover the various availability zones that you have in minutes, right? You can really, in terms of actually answering to a potential cyber threat, you're much more nimble, much more agile. Like that is a non-starter in terms of a differentiator and a positive of cloud versus say an on-prem type of deployment. Now, you know, security resilience, we talk a lot about that, and you know, at least from our perspective, our point at 10x is that we know that some of our competitors, for example, don't necessarily offer the choice, and inherently they would take on, because let's say it's managed on their own cloud, on their cloud instance or cloud infrastructure, that they are taking on a lot of that responsibility themselves. In our case, we either can run the core as a managed service, right, thereby taking on a lot of the responsibility around security, right, and leveraging our partners such as AWS and all the investments that they've made, along with our expertise and our own security teams and so on, to guarantee really top-notch SLAs. But we know very well that especially for some of the larger banks, right, being able to deploy the types of innovative core banking software that we provide into their own infrastructure and having them control the encryption, the keys and everything else is something that is crucial for them, is not something they're willing to budge on. And this is something that we can also provide, right? So I think having that kind of flexibility from a bank's perspective, if I put myself in the, you know, in the shoes of the CTO or of the CISO, I'd want to have that control. In some cases, banks actually come to us and say, you know, we don't want to have to deal with that. We want to get something that we know we can trust, where we've got trusted brands such as, say, Chase and Westpac in Australia running on this. And, you know, this is something I can trust, so I will make abstraction of this, and then I can focus, as I said earlier, on the things that are more interesting to me. We speak to other banks who say, you know what, we are very particular about our security, and I say other banks, I think most banks. And we want to own this. We think we can do it better. We want to deploy this in our own instance of, say, AWS, and that is something that is okay, right? I think we do need to be able to offer that flexibility to the bank, and although doing that, you know, you're kind of moving away from a true SaaS model, which is eventually, I personally believe, is the future of core banking. You know, it is an intermediary step that you can take, and it's something that feels a lot less scary, because giving up control and things that are as, you know, central to what you do as a bank, as security, is always difficult. So I'd say the choice, and your follow-up question was who owns, right? Who owns security? Who's responsible for it? I would say it's, you know, as much as you'd like to own as a bank should be the answer, right? And this trust involved in all this, you have to trust in to some extent, right? That AWS and the various availability zones and so on, they're not all going to fail at the same time, but at the same time, you know, you also need to trust your own teams and your own data centers. So you're shifting trust from one party to another.
Maria, you're chomping at the bit to say something, I know.
I disagree. I don't think you get to choose how responsible you are for security or how much security you're responsible for. Like, I think security is fundamentally everyone's job, right? Like, every single person in every single organization is responsible for security. Because, like, a cyber attack isn't like there's one particular thing that happens, right? Like, complex systems fail because a whole bunch of different things just happen to not work at the same time, right? You end up with, like, security breaches because of a weird series of tiny little failures that all kind of combine together to a totally catastrophic event. And, like, sometimes that's, you know, you hear about, like, someone left a USB stick with a whole bunch of personal information on a train. You're like, well, no, that's one single event, but it's not. It's a failure of policy. It's a failure of a whole bunch of different things together. But I just think security is everyone's job. You can't be like, I don't want to really have to do security.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I agree with you. I think
it's more fun when we disagree with each other.
No, no.
Fight.
I guess in answer to that, right? It's you know, who's ultimately responsible? Yes, everyone's responsible, but how much control do you want to have over how you deal with security is probably where the optionality needs to lie, right? where some folks would rather take care of absolutely everything, right? And some others are okay to, have a trusted, platform on which they rely for a lot of this stuff. But ultimately, it is everyone's responsibility. I fully agree with you.
Time is getting away from us, so I'm just going to stop it there before you come to blows. Are there any questions from the floor? Yeah, there's a couple. Can we go to this gentleman first? It's Chetan.
Hi, my name is Chetan, managing partner at Cedar. So, there's a lot being said about cloud and how cloud can be amazing. If one has to look at the scalability and next generation challenges, what kind of challenges should banks be prepared when they move on to the cloud?
Do you want to take that,
Yeah,
Karen? It sounds like it's one for you because
yes,
you're
I
the
think
cloud
so.
provider.
Okay, so for me is depends on where the journey is, right? Where they are in their journey. Are they what we call the green field, which just moving in, or they're already in the middle of it, or fully digital native, right? I'll start with the green field because that's where all the perceptions happen, and you have to unblock those kinds of perception. So I think first thing is they need to understand where they want to be in the next 3 or 5 years, or even not next year, like 3 or 5 years, right? Because some of the greenfield customers that we have, they always tell us the journey for us to be in tier 2 or tier 1, it would take us, being in the cloud would take us 3 to 5 years. So if that's what you want, right? And then we always do the working backwards process, right? It's peculiar, but it's what we call really unraveling the customer's brain on what they think about it. So what they need to prepare is speed. Are they ready for it? Because in the cloud, the failure when you're there is really in front of you. It happens really in front of you, and how fast can you iterate? Second is, do you have the resources to do that? Like enough resources and capability to do that. So just a bit of preparation. The third one is, we always ask them what is this for, right? Why do you want to use the cloud? Why we're asking that is, we want to make sure is the customer is at the center of it. Is it just for the benefit of your board to be a unicorn or whatever? Or is just you having these big attachments on the mainframe, you're hugging it every day, you don't want to release it or modernize it, right? Being modern doesn't need to be trendy. Being modern is understanding how you make use of your resources right now to prepare you for the future. Last but not the least is, and Maria pointed out clearly today, is if something happens, what is your expectation of the cloud in terms of resiliency? Because that expectations right now need to be front and center rather than later. Because again, moving to the cloud is one thing, executing on it is another thing, and securing it is the third thing that you need to understand if you want your thinking to go in the cloud. However, if you're a bank who's been, because we have banks who still are talking about a lot of things in being a monolith and on-prem, the conversations there are quite different, because how the questions we ask them is, how are you innovating on behalf of your customers, right? How is that front end addressing it, providing you the data to hyper-personalize that experience? Ever since I joined the banking industry, the word frictionless is really in my ear. But at the end of the day, until this millennia, I'm so surprised that still, how can we make this frictionless for our customers, Karen? And I always say, oh shoot, not again. And I said, how would you want to do it, right? Because that frictionless doesn't just necessarily mean I give you a very good product, you're happy. I think it's more on the back end. How am I protecting that particular email of my customer that is used in logging in everything, how am I protecting that? Right? So those are the things, there's a lot of considerations, but the key thing there is how fast can you work with it? Are you preparing your organization for it? Third is, where do you want to be in the short term and in the long term? Because we believe in that customer journey and also their end customer's journey. I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
Yeah, by all means, we're going to have to cut it short. If you've got anything to add it now.
Yeah, I guess I would add to that, to me the biggest risk is actually is thinking you're transforming, but you're not actually transforming. You're taking a process that was run on-prem, you run the same process on the cloud. You're not truly I think modernizing, you think you're modernizing, but you're not truly transforming, if that makes sense. And we see a lot of that happening. We see a lot of people who want, as Karen said, they want to run what they have, but on the cloud. And as banks go from, in my opinion, in the future, will become data companies, not even technology companies. I hear a lot of banks saying banks are technology companies with a balance sheet. In reality, banks are more and more becoming data companies, right? And so having that endpoint, well, I think all the things that are built on top of an events-driven architecture and so on, all this innovation that is shiny and beautiful is built on an infrastructure, needs to be built on an infrastructure that has these attributes, and having that as in your line of sight and what you're working towards is really what banks should be looking at, not just recreating legacy on the cloud. And that's why we like to talk about transformation, not modernization. I think modernization is a term that is a byword sometimes for actually not really transforming things. And so, yeah, I guess I would add to that, to me that's the biggest risk, is not true transformation, is modernization, which is a halfway street.
And I'm going to leave the last word to you, Maria. But presumably, because you've been creating new institutions, all this is unnecessary hot air for you.
Oh no, I think if you're doing a 3 to 5 year transformation project, like you've probably dropped the ball somewhere in the past and not been keeping an eye on what's happening in the industry and solving problems as you go along. Yes, please don't ever make me do a 5-year transformation project.
And on that punchline, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention.